48-year-old Sheldon Johnson. This is a guy who he got out of prison in 2023 after serving 25 years, right? So in less than a year, he landed himself a spot, an interview on the Joe Rogan podcast. Biggest podcast there is, right? He's a self-proclaimed advocate for criminal justice, and pretty much has the stance that, him going to prison for 25 years was injustice, right? So he comes on Joe Rogan's podcast. I want to rant a little bit about just his podcast appearance, a lot of things he says now that something major has happened, pretty wild and very disturbing, that we can look back on this podcast. So I went back and watched this whole podcast episode with Sheldon Johnson, and there's some very telling things here. And even looking through the comment section, it didn't seem like he was fooling anybody, coming on there like, hey, I'm just this great guy. My crimes weren't that bad. I should have never got 25 years, so I want to go into some things there, and then we'll get into the details of how less than a month after his appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast, he has now been arrested for murder, and not, it's a pretty brutal, gruesome murder. Okay. According to the details, I mean, we're talking dismembered bodies, parts in freezers. It's wild. Someone begging for their life, saying they have a family. I mean, it's awful stuff. Okay. But Sheldon Johnson, he goes on this podcast, and I guess he got on there through, another guy who's friends with Joe. And this guy, his name is Josh, I believe. And he's like a criminal defense attorney, something like that. And he pretty much vouches for Sheldon and gets him on this episode, because of his reputation and his relationship with Joe. So Joe trusts that this guy, Sheldon, he's the real deal. He's a good guy, and he really is authentically what he claims to be and what he stands for, right? So he lets him on this episode, and you just hear this guy go on about, I got 25 years in prison for 2 stitches. The guy had 2 stitches. So yeah, 2 stitches got me 25 years, total injustice. It was never that bad. Never really takes any accountability or shows any remorse or sorrow for anything he did. And so he keeps saying 2 stitches, 2 stitches. Then he gets into the actual breakdown of what the crime was, what he did to get these 25 years. It's a whole lot more than 2 stitches. Okay. He basically says,
and when I saw him, he had a bunch of jewelry on. He was with his girlfriend. She had a bunch of jewelry on. And I said, hey, man, where's my money at? Oh, I was going to pay you. So I robbed him. And I took his jewelry. And his girlfriend happened to be there. And unfortunately, she got caught up in the situation. I had a bunch of young guys with me, and they robbed her as well. And he got hit in the head with the gun right here on the side of his head. And he got 2 stitches. And they gave me 25 years for that case. Another guy that I ran into, he also owed me some money. He owed me $7,000, and it kind of went along the same ways. He was selling drugs out of an auto parts store. Reading in between the lines and outside the margins without really going into all of the details, I robbed him.
Reading in between the lines and outside of the margins and under where the green grass grows and into the detail, you got what you deserved.
So that's where the 2 stitches comes from. And that's how he sums it up. I got 25 years for 2 stitches. He makes it sound like he pushed a guy off his bicycle and got 25 years. Okay. So already right there, you see that this guy's clearly, I'll just be honest. I mean, if you're new here, I've done 10 years in prison myself, and it wasn't too long ago that I got out. And I can tell you now, inmates are notorious for they're going to manipulate the narrative. They're very deceitful. They're very good at just twisting things and downplaying things, at just really turning the story in the way that they want it to go. And, it just came across very clearly in this podcast. And you can tell by the comment section, there's a lot of new comments now that this murder has happened, that, everyone's flooding back to this episode and just kind of commenting on the irony or just, all that. But if you go down to the comments that were at the time of this in February, people weren't buying it then. And so they're definitely not buying it now. Okay. So like I said, less than a month later, this guy gets arrested for murder. Let me pull up an article and just go into some of the detail about this gruesome murder scene, crime scene, and arrest. USA Today says Sheldon Johnson, Joe Rogan podcast guest, arrested after body parts found in freezer. Says a man who became a public advocate for criminal justice reform after being released from prison last year was arrested on a murder charge Thursday after police said they found a person's body parts inside a New York City home. Sheldon Johnson, 48, was jailed without bond Friday morning on charges including second-degree murder. The victim's relationship with Johnson was not immediately known, but the New York Police Department identified the victim as 44-year-old Colin Small. Johnson also faces charges of manslaughter and criminal possession of a weapon. Police said officers responded to Small's Bronx home to conduct a welfare check on Tuesday night and found a headless torso in the apartment. Responding paramedics pronounced the victim dead at the scene. Well, I'm sure they did. He didn't have a head. And officials later identified him as Small. According to CBS New York, police said Johnson shot Small and dismembered his body. A search of Johnson's Harlem apartment revealed the remainder of the body, the arms and the head inside of a freezer. So he brought the arms and the head back with him to his own apartment and put them in the freezer. "I'm innocent," Johnson shouted as he was led out of a police station after his arrest. Yeah, okay. Now, here another article for ABC says, Sheldon Johnson charged with murder, manslaughter, criminal possession of a weapon, accused of killing and dismembering a man. Now, they say the gruesome discovery was made Tuesday when authorities were called to 979 Summit Avenue in the High Bridge section at around 8:25 p.m. for a wellness check of an occupant in apartment 6G. Orlando Medina, the building superintendent, says a tenant called him around 1 a.m. in the morning. Someone was pleading for their life. She said she heard 2 gunshots. Someone said, "Please don't kill me. I got family." Something like that. And 2 more gunshots pretty quickly, Medina said. A torso and arms were found inside of the victim's apartment. Detectives obtained a search warrant Wednesday night for Johnson's Harlem apartment on 5th Avenue, where they found the victim's legs and head in a freezer. So they go on to say they also found like some big suit. I think they call it a Tyvek suit. And that's the white thing you see him wearing. I mean, it sounds like he's, I saw another article. I can't find it, but, they were commenting how it seems like this guy's watched every true crime or how to get away with murder or serial killer, documentary that there is, because he was taking all these calculated steps to try to really truly get rid of this body. I mean, he shot the guy in the head once, right? Next thing you know, there's body parts in freezers. He's wearing this medical suit, probably for blood and DNA, to keep clean. And he's, they found some body parts still in the victim's apartment. And then they find more body parts transported to Sheldon Johnson's apartment in the freezer. So he's like taking them piece by piece as he can. He's like maybe possibly going back and forth from his apartment to this apartment to just get, body part after body part and hopefully do away with it. And, he's really got this whole thing figured out. I mean, this guy was going to just dispose of every last particle of this body if he had not been caught. If it weren't for this person, who honestly brought real justice to Colin Small, this neighbor who heard, there were reports of other neighbors saying, "Hey, we heard some bangs. We didn't really call the police. There's an old rusty elevator in the building. There's a lot of noise. There's cars that backfire. We heard bangs, but nobody really thought, oh, someone's being killed. Someone's being murdered. We didn't know what it was. We just thought it was noise." But luckily, there was a neighbor in this apartment who heard through the walls a man begging for his life, pleading, "Hey, I have a family. Please don't do this." And that was enough. That mixed with the bangs. She called the superintendent, not even the police, which is wild. But still, That was enough to do it. Call the superintendent of the building, who called the police and did a welfare check. And you got to imagine the fear and shock going through Sheldon Johnson, who is in this man's apartment at the time, probably gathering more body parts to haul back to his apartment, doing his second load, doing his second transport. And all of a sudden, police, open up, welfare check. Oh, crap. They're going to dislike my Joe Rogan appearance episode now. I've been caught. But yeah, so that's basically what happened. So there's your breakdown on that wild case. I'm definitely going to be following this. So make sure you subscribe if you're into this for the long haul and you want to see the whole court process, jail process. I'm going to be working with my fellow YouTube channel, Phone Calls from Prison, who specializes. There is none better on YouTube who gets the jail and prison phone call recordings from these people that we follow in these true crime cases. So definitely going to be working with him in the very near future to obtain any jail calls we can of Sheldon Johnson now that he's been arrested. So we're going to be looking at that and any new updates as we go all the way to the court, all the way through the trial, and even past that. Okay, so make sure you subscribe if you're into this and you really want to stay with this, because I will be. That's for sure. Thanks for watching. See you next time.